Whenever I'm trying to do an intro for something, I'm always struck by the notion that I have to be acting as someone different because of the channel name. I call myself Work in Progress. That's obviously not my name. It seems interesting that there's this split, this sort of divide between who I am as a person and what I put online. So it's always hard to start these things. It feels like I'm not being myself. So I'm going to try and, in this video, I'm going to try and keep sort of a stream of consciousness flow, so I'm not muddying the waters as to what I'm saying. With what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to create this space where I can develop not only as a writer and as a reader, but also as a speaker. I can get more confident when the camera's on, because I feel like when the camera comes on, it's like an immediate switch. It's like I develop an entirely new persona. I don't naturally talk like this. I don't think anyone does. Because there is a camera on me, I feel like I'm acting, and you feel like you're putting on a performance. I think YouTube itself is very performative. All these influencers and anyone really, I think there are very few honest YouTubers online. I think very few of them act the way that they do in their videos. Anyway, that's not what you're here for. The point of this video is to go through what I read in September, and it's been a stacked month. I have read 9 books this month. Read it and weep. 9. I've read 9 books, so I'm really getting there with this whole reading thing. For context for this month, my girlfriend and I had recently recorded videos for each other where I had gone on her channel and picked her TBR, and she had gone on mine and picked my TBR for September. So 5 of these books were her picks that I should read, and I'm going to say she did a very good job, apart from one, but I won't blame her for that because that would be wrong. So the first book I read in September was this book here. This is Cormac McCarthy's Outer Dark. Now, Outer Dark is one of Cormac McCarthy's earlier works. It's absolutely brilliant. If you haven't read any of his books, read them. Start with The Road, that's the best one to start off with. It's very accessible. And then get into his prose, his style, get acquainted with the fact that he doesn't use much punctuation. That's a hard one to get to grips with if you're new to his work. This book here tells the story of a young woman who gives birth to her brother's son. And it is about how this brother of hers takes the child in the forest to die for his own reasons, shame, guilt. He doesn't tell his sister that he's done this. He just tells her that the baby has died. And the baby gets picked up by a tinker, as he was called in the day. You would count him as a distributor of wares or a merchant. And the sister goes on this journey to find out what has happened to her baby. She doesn't believe that it's dead. She doesn't believe it. And this book is extraordinary. There is such beautiful prose in this book. I think David Foster Wallace said that when you read Cormac McCarthy's work, it's like he's basically got the entire dictionary in his head. He has just used an extraordinary swath of language throughout his work. It's really incredible to read some of his stuff. Later this month, I read a book by William Faulkner, and I won't go into what that was yet, just for the suspense of the video. But reading this and looking back on it now, Cormac McCarthy takes a lot from the work of William Faulkner, at least not only in his language and the way in which his characters talk. They're very accurate to their period, and very sort of, even the way in which the words are written is accurate, not just how the characters talk and their manner. He also borrows stylistic devices, including the use of italicized text, sort of separate paragraphs and even single sentences, which is something that Faulkner does. The characters themselves were fascinating. I think this is one of the most interesting sort of... Cormac McCarthy is known for not really doing many female characters, especially as his main characters. And I think this book just tells he could do it, he could crush it. So for anyone who hasn't read Cormac McCarthy, start with The Road. This one is a great one to go to early on. I think this is only the 3rd or 4th of his that I've read. Brilliant book. So the next book that I read is this piece of crap, Before the Coffee Gets Cold. It is abominable. But let me just tell you the plot first before I get into that. Before the Coffee Gets Cold tells the story of a cafe in Tokyo which has this one certain thing that's special about it, which is that if you sit at this certain table, follow all these elaborate rules, you can travel back in time. But the catch is you can only stay back in time if you're sat at that one table, and you have to return to the present before the coffee gets cold. So it's this brilliant premise that this writer totally wastes using repetitive language, ball-achingly simple prose. I don't know if I can say that actually. I understand that a lot of people have resonated with this book and it's been quite successful. I don't know why. I really don't know why. It's incredibly simple. It feels like a self-help book in the guise of a narrative fiction, and the author is coming to achingly simple conclusions with things. His stories are so offensively palatable, in as much as there's not a single challenging thing in this book. It tackles topics that could be challenging. It tackles dementia and death and grief, all these things that are very nuanced and very complex. He makes them as if this is a children's book. I really thought when I was reading this should be for children, or at least people of about the age of 10. That is the level that he is writing at. And I know this was a play beforehand, and it reads like stage direction. I really wouldn't recommend this to anyone. I think it's offensive how bad this how bad. You can tell I think it's offensive. My voice cracked. That's how bad this book is. So get in the bin. Rubbish. The next book I read was Rumour Gardens the River. Change of quality. This book is great. Essentially, a love letter to India for the author who lived in India for a long time of her life. The same author who's written books such as Black Narcissus, which was turned into a film by Powell and Pressburger, and The River itself was adapted into a French film by Jean Renoir in 1951, I believe. So this book tells the story of a young girl called Harriet who is on the cusp of the sort of adolescent age. She's 12 years old from memory, and she's starting to deal with all these complex adolescent feelings. At the same time as this, she's having to grapple with losing people she loves and also developing feelings of love for a certain character in the book. I won't go into it because I think a lot of people should read this book. Rumour Gardens' prose is at once very simple and very accessible, but not in a bad way as with the previous book. It's incredibly engaging, and you can fly through this. It's only just over 100 pages. It's so lovely to read this. This is going to sound pretentious. It flows in much the same way as its title suggests. It flows like a river. And there are some really beautiful quotations in here. And there's one on the back actually. You can't stop days or rivers. I just think that's lovely. And I really recommend people read this book, and also read Black Narcissus, which I haven't finished, but I will do. So the next book I read that month was this behemoth. Now, it's not huge. It just took me a while to read it, or at least it felt like it did. This is Sally Rooney's Beautiful World, Where Are You? Sally Rooney, I'm a big fan of her writing. I loved Normal People. I thought it was a terrific book. This... what was that noise? This book just, I don't think, did it for me quite the same. It's very much focusing on her tropes that I don't like as much and her stylistic elements that weren't quite for me. There's a lot of criticism online of Normal People where it talks about how Sally Rooney breaks down in forensic detail very unnecessary minutiae, and this pads out the book. Oh my god, it's in this. It's an absolutely pervasive problem. There's a section in which she describes how a character inputs a location into Google Maps, and it tells you exactly how she uses Google Maps. We don't need to know this. We're a modern audience. Sally Rooney is a modern writer. She knows that we know. She knows that we know, and we know that she knows that we know. So why is she doing this? She is a better writer than this. She writes people incredibly well. Her characters here are really well-rounded, really interesting, and yet I don't care about them that much because they just make bad decisions over and over and over. And another problem that I found with this book, or at least a problem for me stylistically, was her heavy-handed social commentary. Sally Rooney being very left-wing and verging on communist, or at least I think she writes her books from a Marxist perspective. Her political opinions are of no concern to me. If it affects your writing, that's where I have an issue. I feel like the text is not half as strong. It's weaker because of what she's putting in this book. And it becomes much less of a story about people and much more of a story about Sally Rooney's opinion on Marxism. Another voice crack. I must be getting angry today. And this is nothing against her politics themselves. That's not what I'm getting at. I just think that to fill your words with political meaning, you have to be able to do it skillfully. And I think this just lacks the skill. This was also a problem in Normal People, much less so. It's far more pervasive here. Next book I read was this one here, An Artist of the Floating World by Kazuo Ishiguro. Again, this is another book that was sort of middle of the road, I think. I really loved the first book of Kazuo Ishiguro's that I read, which was A Pale View of Hills, which had this brilliant, unreliable narration throughout, which completely threw me for a loop. When you realise that everything you've read so far is now completely changed, and you just have to look at the book with some sense of admiration for doing that to you. This book, however, it uses a lot of the same narrative devices that were used in his debut, including the unreliable narrator. However, my problem with this one is that the unreliable narration really serves less of a purpose. It makes sense as to why he's using it, but it's more of just a subjective viewpoint than anything that's like truly unreliable. It's just, I don't know. This book here deals with art and the implications of art, how we come to terms with our actions in the past. And those are interesting themes. I was really excited to read this. I thought it'd be really interesting. In a sense, it is, but I think that Kazuo Ishiguro's style and his sort of weaker, unreliable narration, in my opinion, just sort of brings the book to not being as compelling and instead being sort of languorous. When it says floating, that's probably the perfect word to describe how I read this. It was as if I was just cruising through it at a sort of slow, tepid pace. Would I recommend this? I don't know really. I think I'm sort of on the fence with it. Let's say yes to people who like Kazuo Ishiguro's writing. So what was next? Oh yes, this. So, this book, Grief is the Thing with Feathers, I think I've heard this in two places being mentioned. Firstly was Cillian Murphy, who is one of my favourite actors, who was talking about this book and how it was really doing something different to modern prose. And then I think the other one was Jack Edwards, who has also read this. I am a big fan of explorations in grief, not only in literature, but also in film, especially in film. I think that's where it can get really interesting. And reading it, you get to see that this book is doing a lot of things very differently to modern literature. Firstly, it's minuscule. It's only over 100 pages, barely. And it's also structurally very strange. So, or I guess strange is the wrong word, that implies a negative connotation. I guess the word would be unconventional. So, what you've got throughout the book is you've got this almost Faulkner-esque multiple perspectives, where you've got characters like Dad and Boys and Crow as like the three main perspectives. And they've got different writing styles. So the Dad, if you look at this page here, was written very much as standard prose. And then if you go to the Boys, for instance, for a piece of their work, you've got this. So you've basically got these sort of, I don't know if you call it poetry, but very sort of simple statements. They're not like human speech, is what I'm trying to say. So you get a piece from the Crow, and the Crow speaks. The Crow's monologuing in this book reminds me a lot of sort of freestyle rap in a weird way, in that it relies a lot on sibilance and the sound of words and rhyming. It's a really interesting structural and stylistic read, just for that. In terms of what it's trying to do and what the story it's trying to tell, I like the metaphor of the Crow being this sort of observer and helping, in a sense, people come to terms with grief. But I think in terms of its style, I think its style outweighs its substance. I would recommend it on just a stylistic read alone, because you really do get a complete range of techniques here that are used. You can blast through this book in less than an hour and a half. I think I did it in just shy of an hour and a half, and I was probably taking my time. You can really fly through this, no pun intended. But it's a great stylistic read in terms of its substance. I think you'll find better explorations of grief out there. Now, for something that was more substance than style, is Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea. This is an ugly cover, I appreciate that, so I won't burden your screen too long by showing you it. Everyone knows Hemingway, everyone's probably heard of this book, and everyone probably knows what it's about. It's very simple. It's about a man who goes fishing and finds a fish. But this fish is more than just a fish. It's a symbol for perseverance and endurance. And the story itself, I really like the story of this. I think it's so simple, but it's really kind of tragic. It plays out like a tragedy almost. It's almost operatic in its scope. It really is. I feel like Hemingway's writing is so blunt and matter of fact, but there's such poetry in it. I loved Hemingway's prose itself. I think he's a beautifully talented writer, and I'm excited to read more of his work. It really resonated with me as a sort of beautiful story about humankind, and I think that anyone who is anyone should read this, because you can fly through it again. It'll only take you about an hour and a half. Speaking of great literature, I read this book here, Mikhail Bulgakov's The Heart of a Dog. This was probably one of the best books I've ever read, and that may be a surprise to people, or maybe it won't be, who knows. This book has quite possibly the greatest premise of any book I've ever heard. A sort of mad scientist, I'd like to use the term mad just because of what he does, but the scientist basically implants the testicles and pituitary gland of a deceased man into a dog, and this dog becomes more humanoid and it develops human behaviors. And it's sort of a satire on Soviet culture and also an exploration of the extreme lengths that science will go to. And it's just hilarious. It's so funny. Bulgakov was known to be a writer with an excellent sense of humour, and I think this book just proves it. It's really humorous, it's really accessible in its prose, and it has a lot to say, I think. The final book that I read this month was this one here, William Faulkner's As I Lay Dying. So that's the book that I was mentioning in Cormac McCarthy's Outer Dark. I don't know about this one. I'm still kind of trying to make up my mind on it. It follows the Bunyan family who take their deceased mother back to Jefferson in Mississippi, where she requested she go after she died. And it's about the journey that they go on, what they learn about themselves, what they learn about others, and also sort of reflecting on their mother's life, and also introspection, a lot of introspection about the world around them and their family. Faulkner's unique device here, and it is, I would argue it's a unique device for the time, which is that he has multiple perspectives, and it's not just one or two, like a romance novel nowadays. This is not Ali Hazelwood. This is 15 different perspectives throughout the whole book. Narratively, it's very interesting, and I think the story itself is one that is quite brilliant in terms of what it's saying and what it's doing, and Faulkner's prose is gorgeous. It's just beautiful. His narrative device here is innovative, however, it absolutely, in my opinion, obfuscates from the main emotional beats of the story. If you're trying to follow 15 perspectives over 59 chapters, and the chapters can vary in length from a couple of words to over 10 to 12 pages. It's like 59 different vignettes, and it's up to you as the reader to find the narrative thread. And this can be really challenging at times, and this may be a problem of my own, but this one was just, I think that his stylistic device, while interesting and very admirable to do, in my opinion, it sort of weakens the book. I'm still stuck on what I think of this one, really. Would I recommend it? I don't know, really. I think Faulkner is such a name that he should be read. If you like Faulkner, please tell me why I'm wrong. I want to like him, I really do. Anyway, that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.